Okay, so now we're going to do this worksheet. It's looking at chemical reactions. So where it says chemical, and I know the paper is backwards. So it says chemical reaction 3, 4, 1, and 2. And we're actually going to start with 1 because it's easier. So the reactions that this is talking about is the reactions that we did in our lab. So we're looking at these 4. So this activity, and I have this on page 67. So our steel wool is Fe. The copper sulfate is CuSO4. We saw that on the beaker. The magnesium ribbon is Mg. Copper sulfate again. Yeast, I don't know the chemical formula for yeast. Hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. It's like H2O, except it's got an extra oxygen. Ammonia, NH4. Actually, NH4OH. And then copper sulfate, CuSO4. So now we're going to look at how these combined and moved around and made that chemical change and why there was a temperature change, a color change. Because what was happening is these bonds here were breaking and making something new with this other object, in this case, iron. Okay, so let's look at these. So let's go down here. Let's look at the first reaction. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to name these sides. So this side here, on this side of the yield sign. So I have this yield sign. So these are going to be called my reactants. And they break bonds and remake bonds, and you have something new. You have a new product. So these are your reactants and these are your products. And like I say, that when I go on a field trip, my students, my reactants, whatever I leave school with, I have to have the same amount of students, and they can sit wherever they want on the bus. They can change their location, but I have to, whatever reactants, whatever students I leave with, I have to come back with that same amount. And that is called the law of conservation of mass or of matter, right? You can use either one of those words. Law of conservation of matter, LOCM. Okay, so this is an easy one. We're going to start here with our steel wool. So my steel wool, I just showed you on there. The chemical formula is Fe. The copper sulfate is CuSO4. These bonds are going to break apart and remake them, and I'm going to have something called iron sulfate, which is going to be Fe. There's my iron sulfate, SO4. And then what's left over, I've got to have a copper. So again, the students can rearrange the seats, but I have to have the same one. So here's my iron, just like we just did on that other worksheet. You're going to draw these, these are the bonds. So there's my iron, and then here's my copper, here's my sulfur, and I have 4 oxygens. 1, 2, 3, 4. These bonds are going to break and they're going to rearrange. Here's now my copper. Here's my iron, sulfur, and I have 4 oxygens. What I had on my reactant side, I have to have on my product side. Okay, let's look at the next one. Magnesium, copper sulfate, and then I'm going to get magnesium sulfate and copper. And that's what those little things floating around in the copper sulfate were. So here's my magnesium, and here's again my copper sulfate. CuS, 1, 2, 3, 4 oxygens. Those bonds break apart. There's fizzing, gas is formed, and I have something new. I now have magnesium sulfate and copper. Again, my reactants, label them. My reactants must equal my products. My products are on the right. My reactants are on the left of this yield sign. Okay, let's look up here. Now let's look at the hydrogen peroxide. They get a little more difficult. Hydrogen peroxide is H2O2, and I had 2 molecules of it. Trust me, this works out. It reacts with the yeast is the catalyst. It's what causes the things to change. It helps it change. So here are my reactants, and these are my products. So I'm going to end up with H2O and oxygen gas. Okay, so here I have, we're not going to worry about how it's bonded. I have 2 hydrogens. Well, no, I don't. Hold on. 2 hydrogens, 2 oxygens. And then here I have 2 hydrogens, 2 oxygens. So I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like math. 2 times 2 is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 times 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So here I now have 2 H2Os. Here's my oxygen, 2 hydrogens, my oxygen, my 2 hydrogens, plus my 2 oxygens. So here I'm going to have a balance because of the law of conservation of mass or matter. What I have on my reactant side, I have to have the same on my product side. Okay, so now this one really gets crazy. Here is, I have ammonia and copper sulfate. So my ammonia was sorry. NH4OH. And I had 2 sets of those. So look, here's 2 sets. And then I had my copper sulfate. And this, and we needed to draw this, we did these for you. So here's my 2 ends, 1, 2. So like here's 1 molecule. Here's 1 compound of it. NH4OH and H4OH. Plus my copper sulfate. And now this gives me, it's a little more complicated. It's, this is the way you're going to write it. Cu, don't worry about it. You're never going to have to do it this complicated in 8th grade. OH2. The subscript is out. Plus, and then I'm going to have parentheses NH4 parentheses 2 SO4. Okay, and that's all we have for that one. I hope that helps. We'll go over it more when I get